Well, hello YouTube, it's me Fordmaster, and welcome back to another Lazerpig reaction. So, a brief update on the Ukrainian war. Needless to say, I have been keeping up with, as much as I can, with everything that's been happening over there. And, I mean, unfortunately, I have heard, just from the way everything is going, that Russia has been making small advances, but thankfully, nothing big. Now, at the same time, it can get a lot confusing, just hearing from all these, hearing from like every news source about what's happening. So, I very much look forward to watching this, just seeing, like, trying to, like, sort things out, see what stuff I missed, and, you know, just get more up to date, because I actually want to know how this thing is going. Besides that, I did not do a reaction to Lazerpig's last video, which was, oh god, he was talking about, he was in kind of like a discussion stream. Oh god, what was the guy's name? Gonzola Lira? Is that his actual name? Anyway, I went and actually, after I watched his discussion on the roundtable discussion, I went and actually tried to watch the actual stream itself, and admittedly, I couldn't watch it. It made me too angry. So anyway, hopefully, better news. Apart from that, let's actually get into this, shall we? And see if there's anything we've missed in the fog of war, as it were.
Hello, it's me, everyone's second or third favorite badly cropped PNG of an animal. Like, I know it's been a while.
Yeah.
I have a lot of videos in the works as well as some other projects, so don't worry. The content you subscribe to and harass me daily for will happen. But due to unforeseen circumstances, the videos are taking a little bit longer to produce than I thought they would. This is mostly because of YouTube. Also, I've been printing t-shirts. That's right. Do you lack trip? Is your
actual Lazerpig
as
merch?
The Sahara Desert? Do fanboys look at you and instantly shrivel into a dry husk? Is the last thing you ever made sweet love to a pine cone that you drew a face on? Don't judge me! And threats no more! I've teamed up with the North Atlantic Fellows Organization to bring you the very finest in Lazerpig themed drip, like this one, and this one, and this mug. Don't forget your Lazerpig themed trans flag. Not your thing? Then make all the boys jealous down the local Cool Kids Club with our Make Albonia Great Again MAGA hats. Cause I'm running for president of Albonia.
Albonia?
Why? Do I need a reason? We're gonna make Albonia great again! An F-111 for every child! Logistical. And don't forget, I make no money from this!
That's right, baby!
By buying this Lazerpig themed hoodie, I make absolutely zero money! All of the profit goes directly to various Ukraine charities and causes, like this current drive to buy rehabilitation equipment for the Children's Hospital in Rivne. Buy now while stocks last, because when this war ends, all of this is gone! We're adding more designs all the time, so if you don't even like what you see, then, you know, buy something anyway, because, you know, artists take a long time to do this kind of stuff, okay? Doesn't just happen overnight.
Yeah,
anyway,
I mean,
in order to pass YouTube's hatred of anything that doesn't conform to Middle America's Suburban Christian Mothers Association's strict guidelines, and to bridge the lack of content gap, I present a brief overview on the current situation of Ukraine, stripped of anything fun and exciting that YouTube bots don't like, and presented in the most bland and boring way possible. That's right, we're doing Piron style. I mean, not totally Piron style. I mean, I tried to do his accent, but, you know. G'day mates and people in the greatest country in the world, Australia. I'm Australian and that's a kangaroo. I'm gonna open this tinny and get wanked on Hypnol. Let's put a shrimp on the barbie. Crikey, I pay a lot of tax. That's all I know about Australia. And anyway, here's the video. For those of you not in the loop, there has been a major series of attacks by Russian forces against the Ukrainian lines, especially around the town of Vuhledar. These attacks have been heavy in losses for Russia, with very limited territorial gain in return. The attacks on Vuhledar, which many have alleged is the major Russian offensive we've all been expecting, is very telling of the current state of the Russian army. A recent video by Puron Australian PowerPoint man, discussed the relative strengths of Russia, its heavy advantage in technology, numbers, artillery, and aircraft, and that it's gradually fixing its logistical issues. Strongly suggested that the worst of the war is not yet over for Ukraine, and many have seen this assault as evidence of this. This is flown in the face of the common narrative that Russia is basically running on empty, digging equipment out from storage that hasn't seen the light of day in over 40 years, and throwing hundreds of thousands of conscripts with moldy and rusty AKs onto the front lines to try and hold back the Ukrainian advance. And since Piran's video, there has been a certain reality check imposed on the community, and a feeling of impending doom and general hopelessness. This has been seized on by the Vatniks, who constantly like to remind us that Russia is one of the largest countries in the world, and in terms of sheer raw manpower, the resources they have compared to Ukraine might as well be considered infinite, and that Ukraine is only delaying the inevitable. And with rumours of a second planned major offensive sometime in the summer, many believe that Ukraine was sitting on borrowed time. But then the assault on Vuhledar happened. Both myself and many like me dismissed this as any kind of major attack, as it honestly just looked like a group of drunk Vatniks who took a wrong turn and ran into a minefield. It later transpired that this was indeed the major offensive we'd all been expecting. Assaults were reported the full way along the line as Russian forces advanced almost completely unsupported in single-file columns, bunched up around the middle, and were quick to retreat or abandon their vehicles as soon as explosions began landing around them. The internet was full of images of panicking Russian soldiers either running or being run over by their own retreating vehicles, none of which I can show you because YouTube doesn't like that kind of thing. What became evident was that the troops we were seeing were not particularly well trained or particularly well led, and as time went on, evidence began to mount this was actually a naval infantry brigade that had been largely on the front lines during this assault. Some of these troops, either captured or later interviewed by Russian Telegram channels, would testify that they were in fact the crews of Russian naval vessels such as landing craft and minesweepers, and had not been expecting to see combat and were not trained in the equipment they were given. Many
I mean, at this point, I mean, granted, I'm stopping in the middle of a sentence here, but I mean, when it comes to anything, this might be just my gamer brain talking, but resource management is important here. And if you're literally, granted, I know in like Hearts of Iron 4, which is a game, one of Russia's major strategies is literally wave tactics. Throw enough men at the enemy and have them run out of stuff before you do. At the same time, I've been listening to a lot of stuff talking about how Russia is on the verge of not economic collapse. Like even before the war, they were on the verge demographic collapse. That was the word I'm looking for. Just because out of all like the wars, famines, all that stuff like that, major chunks of the population have been taken out. Major chunks have been taken out of the Russian population. And as a result, they're running out of people. And as I've heard before, this would probably be the last time where Russia could do a major offensive because they'd actually have the manpower to do so. But at the same time, when you see that you're on the verge of, running out of usable people, why are you throwing them into the fire like spare kindling? I mean, we're not talking about the 1930s era Soviet Union here. It's a very different beast.
They were transferred mere days before the planned assault had begun. And while this makes sense to pull these troops off secondary lines, Ukraine is unlikely to deploy sea mines during this war, and Russia is unlikely to stage another naval landing, it does not make sense that you push these troops into a major frontline assault, unless, of course, you have no alternative. In March, Ukraine will start to receive its deadly combination of spring rains and warmer weather, turning the ground into the mud ocean it's famous for, the same mud that helped stop the Nazis. Though Ukraine's infrastructure is considerably more advanced now than it was back then, these muds will likely cause a break in the fighting to which both sides will take advantage of to help reorganize. But it's Ukraine, not Russia, that will be able to take greater advantage of this lull in the fighting. More powerful Western equipment is on the way, not only tanks but much more powerful anti-air, infantry support and artillery systems, as well as a considerable number of newly trained troops. The power of these new troops and the equipment cannot be understated, and while the the OSI warriors of Twitter are happy to debate about the possibility of a new Ukraine advance and which direction it may head in, any theory I've seen so far has been rather ignorant that Ukraine, with this equipment, with these troops, for the first time in this war, would now have the option to open multiple fronts across the entire line, in a tactic sometimes referred to as the Big Front. Ukraine could constantly harass Russian lines, never committing more than it could afford to lose, but committing just enough that Russia would be forced to deploy additional supports from reserves or suffer a potential breakthrough. In my video on the Crusader tank, I spoke about how the British in the desert of 1943 went from heavy defensive warfare, stretching their lines out thin to account for any possible avenue of attack, to a more fluid defense strategy, having smaller holdout boxes with large rapid response forces on hand that can easily come to quickly reinforce any attack. But that tactic has a weakness. A feint attack can trick response forces to opening up gaps in defense lines, and if those response forces get bogged down in fighting, it makes them unable to counter any further attacks on any other sectors they need to cover. To a point, this is how Russia planned to win in the Cold War, lure NATO rapid response forces into a massive battle, which would be largely done by member state nations, while more elite units pushed into the gaps, with smaller commando-style forces attempting to limit the ability of other units to respond. But another way of defeating this kind of defensive strategy is called the Big Front, and that's when you have multiple attacks across the entire line, hitting those defense boxes and pulling back the second reinforcements arrive. The point is to keep the enemy confused as to where the real advance is going to come from, while also exhausting those response forces, draining their fuel, their ammo, and if possible, robbing them of sleep. And this is potentially what Ukraine could achieve. Russia has...
Sleep is very important. What was it? I'm trying to remember. I remember hearing that the Nazi soldiers, especially in the early war, were literally rationed out chocolate that had cocaine in it. Like, I'm forgetting what it was, like Panzer or something, because of course everything was Panzer. But like but the fact that one of the things that caused the Germans to be so good early in the war was the fact their soldiers were literally on drugs. But of course you can't do that forever, and I doubt Russia is doing the same, or at the very least, not to the same degree, hopefully.
To a point, been deploying a mixed static and fluid defense strategy, using highly mobile response forces to respond to attacks. However, that rapid mobility has quickly diminished since the start of this war, and to compensate, they have been famously using heavy artillery to blast all their problems into a fine red paste. And for a time, this strategy has been working, as Ukraine's ability to deal with this artillery dominance was limited, and Russia has been able to adapt to everything they tried. But this hold is weakening. Ukraine has begun to even the field in terms of counter-battery.
Right, yeah, I saw that video. They fired a shot, and then they sat, I believe that's one of the American 155s, if I remember correctly. Because I think I recognize the tow hook on the end of the barrel. But yeah, I saw that video, and they literally fired, packed up the gun, and started driving away within 60 seconds.
Russian counter-battery is able to detect when and where Ukraine's artillery fires, but it takes them on average 90 seconds to return fire. Ukraine is able to pack up and move artillery within 40 seconds, even though their towed artillery they are still using, and have resorted to using mortars for infantry support, which Russia counter-battery systems have trouble detecting. This has allowed what remains of Ukraine's artillery to concentrate almost entirely on counter-battery, which has led to a significant loss of equipment for Russia, who are in danger of losing that RT dominance in key areas. As these rains come and that war turns back into an artillery duel as it did over winter, Russia's ability to rapidly move artillery units, known as shoot and scoot, will become diminished, as the areas in which RT tractors can operate in drop significantly. Thus, Russia may be forced into an uncomfortable situation where mobile guns have to fire once and then move quickly, and the ones that can't will either have to be abandoned after being fired or remain silent, and this will limit their ability to rely on mass artillery for support and force them to enter a counter-battery duel with Ukraine. And if they lose that duel, and with Ukraine receiving far more powerful artillery units that can be packed up and moved faster, whose shells use GPS guidance, computerized targeting, and whose margin of error is half a meter, along with significantly more sophisticated counter-battery radar systems, every indicator is Ukraine will win that duel, with a significant advantage that they have. As not only does Ukraine now have the counter-battery advantage, but it seems like Russia is starting to run out of ammo. While conscript Vodkonomach outside of Vuhledar or Bakhmut can brag about being able able to fire several hundred shells a day, it is a far cry from the several thousand he was able to fire at the start of this war. And on the secondary quieter fronts, Russian troops on Telegram have complained their guns have on average 2 shells each. The PMC Wagner Group have also recently been cut off from...
I will say, at this point, I mean, granted, I realize they're still fighting, they're still, like, you know, the enemy in this war. But at the same time, you can't help but start to feel bad for them just for, like, how screwed they're getting.
Russian army supply, which means their access to anything from tank rounds, mortar shells, artillery shells, and even the 100mm rounds used in their highly sophisticated towed anti-tank guns have been significantly limited. And while Russia will never completely run out of ammo and has factories well capable of producing more units, its current actions suggest that that large stockpile left over from the Soviet times has now run dry, and it's relying on shipping those rounds straight from the factories to the front lines, which logistically takes Russia a long time, especially with how inefficiently those rounds are transported. It's also buying shells from North Korean reserves, and though I've heard different tales of exactly what and how those shells are being supplied. All of these factors heavily indicate that Russia will soon lose that artillery advantage, and if it does, that will open up gaps in Russia's static line of defense, meaning they will have to rely entirely on fluid defense, and here is Russia's major weakness. Among the attackers at Vuhledar were formations of these things, MTLBs, something that came into service in the 1950s. Its primary use is as an engineer vehicle or arty tractor, and its presence on the front line shows it has been recently pushed back into the role of an APC, something it can do, but not really something you want it to do, especially during a supposedly major, very important assault.
Yeah, I'm not going to say anything. That just, you know, that's bad.
What's especially interesting is when these initial assaults did not go as planned, the second wave of Russian soldiers came on foot. The fact that Russian forces are now assaulting Ukrainian positions on foot strongly suggests that it's not a lack of manpower that's the problem, but a lack of equipment, mainly armored vehicles. Over the past few months, Russian troops on Telegram have been complaining about the lack of support equipment, especially trucks. These telegrams are to be believed. We're looking at entire divisions of infantry, that's about 12,000 troops, with anything from 4 to just 1 truck between them all. This is significant because, as Piran said, Russian logistics have come a long way since the opening days. They have become a lot more efficient, but the most, and quite frankly the only efficient part of their logistics train is the train. Munitions are still carried by hand in big wooden boxes with about 3 shells per box, or sometimes only 1 if it's a 155. The trains need to stop outside of HIMARS range, and the ammo is then distributed to multiple smaller ammo dumps scattered across the front by truck. Trucks then have to move this ammo back and forth to frontline units, as many of these ammo dumps are again outside of HIMARS range. Now trucks are needed to move not only ammo, but everything else an army needs. Food, water, medical aid, porn, that's not a joke, spare parts, loot for the guns, etc, etc. And since Russia is almost entirely reliant on artillery to do almost anything, then infantry units don't need the trucks, logistics do. Hence,
what was it? Oh god, I'm forgetting who I saw it from. Was it no, it wasn't the chieftain. It was somebody talking about, no, it was oh god, I'm completely forgetting. One of the channels I've been watching, you know, to keep up with like daily updates on, like, you know, the war. And he was talking about the comparison between well, the US and Russia's ratio from tooth to tail, i.e. how many men are in the fighting part of the unit, i.e. the tooth, versus how many are required for logistics, i.e. the tail. And if I remember correctly, I think in like America's tooth to tail ratio was like one man in the tooth for like every 4 in the tail, I think. Well, Russia's was 4 in a tooth and 1.5 in the tail. At least I think that was it. Oh god. But just like looking at the manpower of, like, I mean, granted this was before the war really got bad, but like even if Russia has improved their tooth to tail ratio, I mean, just that stark difference in like the priorities, you can see where all their problems are coming from. Well, that, and again, the absolute complete lack of usable equipment.
Hence why the infantry is down to using 70-year-old APCs. Frankly, they have nothing else. And if Russian artillery needs to shoot and scoot, then those arty-tractor APCs will now need to stick with the guns to help move them, so soon they might not even have those. Now Russia has an answer to this. It's called the BMP. The rapidly mobile can carry troops and provide fire support to those troops without the need of tank support, while remaining protected against most small arms fire. But just concentrating on the BMP-1 alone, there are considerable reserves of BMPs, especially BMP-1s, but the condition these are in are not exactly great. BMP-1s are hardly reliable when first made. Sitting outside in the elements for 40 years is not exactly a kind thing, and to be honest, if you're a supply depot commander, these are typically the first things that get looted for spare parts. People have estimated about half of Russia's 10,000 reserve BMP-1s are probably operational. This is just a guesstimate. If you put 4 lighters outside in the rain, half of them still will not be working through the magic of statistical probability.
Well, that's the thing. You said half of them were usable, not half of them were combat ready. The usable could literally mean you can start the engine and drive it, and drive it for a bit. That's not saying it's actually usable. Oh, God.
It's more likely that 90% of them are non-functioning, and the few that have probably been picked clean to service those still active. Also keep in mind a lot of BMP-1s were converted into civilian use, including emergency vehicles for impassable areas. If you had a logging incident out in the middle of Russia and you call an ambulance, it would be a BMP that would show up.
Oh, okay.
It's quite frankly badass.
Yeah, that actually is pretty cool.
Used for fighting forest fires. A number were also sold to Russian PMCs like the Wagner Group pre-war, or to foreign governments like the Assad regime in Syria. So exactly how many of these 10,000 BMP-1s are still there and operational is unknown.
Oh, you know, that whole thing you talk about fighting forest fires. I remember early in the war, on the Reddit, the subreddit where they, you know, about the Ukrainian war. I remember that somebody posting videos of forest fires in Siberia that were just going left completely uncontrolled because the army are the ones that usually somebody had posted a video of just showing like forest fires just being left to burn uncontrollably in Siberia because the Russian army was the ones usually in charge of, you know, putting out the fire, but they're kind of indisposed at the moment.
Now, Russia has lost 297 of its initial 750 BMP-1s, and while that still leaves a considerable pool of BMP-1s, more than enough to suit Russia's current needs, it would be wrong to think that for every 1 BMP they have, that equals 1 on the battlefield. The BMP-1 is used a lot by Russia's internal Ministry of Affairs, as well as Putin's internal security forces, and those units are not going to give up on their vehicles save for a direct order from Putin himself, and so far that order has not come, nor is there any indication that it will ever. They are also in use by police forces, military police units, and even prison guards. Before the war, the number of BMP-1s these units had totaled 536, leaving the Russian army with, statistically, just 14 operational BMP-1s, accounting for current verified losses. So exactly how many of Russia's remaining 550 BMP-1s are combat capable and on the front lines remains unknown right now. Now, I'm not suggesting Russia has completely run out of BMP-1s or that they really do only have 14 left, but it does give you an outline of the problem Russia is facing. 2 new massive tank repair facilities recently came online in Russia with the intent of bringing up to a working condition any tanks Russia has in storage. Some of these tanks earmarked for reactivation are the T-62s.
Right.
We've seen Russia deploy T-62s before, but these were given to secondary forces such as the DNR and used as replacements for RT units. Now they are being refitted with mass-produced thermal sights and are considered for frontline service as replacements not for tank units, but as replacements for the BMP-3. Exactly what aspects of the BMP-3 Russia envisions the T-62 performing are unknown, but it does highlight the increasing scarcity of these vehicles and the difficulty Russia has had in replacing them. This is why, in spite of Purin's Doom video, I'm not particularly worried. It is potentially true that Russia is holding a lot of vehicles in reserve for a potential summer offensive, starting in April when the weather changes and the mud dries up, but there is no evidence that this is actually happening. And if it did happen, well, by then, all those new NATO tanks and their equipment, as well as the vast number of freshly trained troops, will be arriving home.
Yeah.
Ukraine could potentially have the option to go on the offensive, not in one location, but across multiple fronts simultaneously, and Russia's ability to deal with that will be limited. Though Ukraine could take heavy losses, this could be the final push that wins them the war. And that's all I got for now. I mean, it's not all I got. I could sit here for hours and go over the true horrors of the Russian front. I mean, Wagner were recently denied rights to recruit more prisoners because Russia now wants to rise penal divisions. That's a thing that's happening in 2023. I could talk about that.
Penal
honestly,
divisions?
at this point, I mean, are any of you surprised? Are any of you really genuinely surprised when you think, oh, they couldn't possibly be that stupid, and then they are? How many times has Russia brought a new low to their reputation this war? I mean, do you know how hard it is to sit here and keep coming up with reasonable explanations to Russia's blatant stupidity? I mean, these attacks at Vuhledar, I'm not joking. I've seen better tactics from World of Tanks players. How do you describe that? I'm trying to be reasonable. I've tried to be objective and showcase what I fully believe this is indicating, but let's not kid ourselves. It was a catastrophe. This is the second most powerful army in the world. This is the nation that, through sheer suggestive placements of military arms, has been able to dictate European economic and military policy for generations. This is the nation of whom the Western world was once so scared of, they banded together to form the NATO alliance. And now they're getting humiliated by a small Eastern European nation. The country that believed, and still believes, it can take on the entirety of the United States of America plus Europe at the same time. I've had arguments with people over stuff like this. Oh yeah, Russia could paradrop into every major capital in the West, and our shitty leaders with their shitty underfunded military couldn't do a goddamn thing about it. It's been a year now, and their unstoppable tank armada is less than a third of the way across Ukraine.
Also, where would they, what planes would they use to drop the paratroopers down with?
First hurdle. The very first hurdle, and they've lost more equipment than most of Europe has combined, and taken more losses in this 1 year than America did in 40 years of Vietnam. Like, I'm gonna be honest with you, it doesn't matter if they are slowly getting their logistics up to speed, or if they have this fairly advanced, in theory, air force that are still kicking around and they're still capable of producing long-range missiles. Before this war, Putin could have retired and would have gone down in history as one of the most powerful and iconic world leaders of all time. People would still regale Russia as some major world power and respected it for its military prowess and all the political power that such bragging rights has.
Yeah.
Now he's having to make the decision if or not to go to a full war economy. Conscript another 300,000 randoms which he doesn't have the equipment for, and pray that this time it will work. Or take the biggest L in modern Russian history, find someone to throw under the bus, and pray no one blames him, and no one in Russia has worked out what a guillotine is. For Russia, look, there's no going back from this. All the power, all the influence they once had is gone. There isn't going to be a final wave of T-14s and Su-57s to bring ultimate victory. What you are seeing in Vuhledar is the current full military might of Russia. That's it. This is what they have now. This is what they are now. This is the best that they can do. Every day, Russia gets weaker, and every day, Ukraine gets stronger. If you honestly think Russia can win this, I admire your optimism.
It really is just sad. I mean, again, as I said before, you have to feel sorry for those troops. I mean, granted, I fully believe that there are people on the ground in the Russian forces that fully believe what they're doing is the right thing. That they've completely drank Putin's Kool-Aid and they're just completely in it, even with everything that's been going on. But I have to believe, I mean, just as like the need to believe that we as humans are good beings, that there are an equal number, or if not hopefully greater number of people in there in the current Russian forces that are there literally because if they don't go into the front lines to get shot at by the enemy, they're going to have somebody behind them shoot them. I can't help but think of, what was it? Probably like Call of Duty. Was it Call of Duty one or two, I forget. It's so long since I played it. But there was one part of the campaign where you're playing in like I think you're playing in Leningrad, and do that stereotypical thing of where, like, oh, three people to a gun. If the first person falls, you know, pick it up, and you know, all that stuff. And there was literally like, was it a commissar? No, am I getting mixed up with Warhammer 40K? Oh God, I can't remember. But like, they did that thing where, you know, if you turn back, we will shoot you. I can't help but think that maybe Russia has implemented that tactic where if the soldiers turn, their superiors will shoot them in the face instead. I mean, granted, I am so happy that this war is going in Ukraine's favor as well as it is. But at the same time, the only thing better than a war where your side is winning is no war at all. And I think that's something we can all agree on. So, with that being said, I hope you guys liked. If you did, leave a like. Of course, as always, Lazerpig's original video is linked in the description. If you're watching this before you watch the original, what are you doing? And yeah, I'll see you next time. Goodbye.